All right, since this is your maiden voyage on the show, and I think this is a question we get often, and we've tried to explain it a little bit, but maybe it would be good to hear from you. What is the difference between your job and Jerry's job? What is the difference between president of baseball ops and executive VP GM?
I think the thing that Jerry has done for me is make me his partner in a lot of ways. So he's invited me in to make the decisions, to work together. We don't always agree on everything, and usually we come to some sort of compromise if we don't agree. Ultimately, the final decision rests with him, but he gives me a lot of latitude along the way to cultivate and develop staff, to install systems and programs that we both think can help make us better, and ultimately to shape the roster from the Dominican all the way to the big leagues. And he's been unbelievable to me over the years. I've worked with Jerry every year but one since the fall of 2011, and the trust that he has put in me is obviously an amazing feeling. He's done a ton for me.
How much of that job, of your job, is managing the staff of baseball operations? Because I think people think of the GM, they think that all day you're on the phone making trades and signing people and scout. Like, how much of your job is spent just managing people like any other manager in the world, not in baseball?
99%, in not exaggerating.
How many people report to you?
I have 6 direct reports, and then from there it spirals off. Jerry and I kind of split up the VP leadership group, and he has entrusted me with a lot of the sort of the pro personnel group and the office group, data science, analytics, baseball projects, and then player personnel at the pro level. And then Jerry tends to take more hands-on with PD and scouting on the amateur and international level, and then we sort of collaborate on the major league roster and staff. The best way I can explain it is I just don't really believe in the super executive, the one person who can walk out on the fields and go, that guy can play, the rest of these guys can't, I'm going to go acquire that guy, I don't need the rest of it. We're all only as good as the people that we surround ourselves with, and I think we're so lucky here to have so many impact people across all of our departments. That is what has made us good as we've sort of taken a step back, rebuilt, and then taken big steps forward. I think we will have more steps to take, but it's the people. It's the people that make an impact every day. There's no way that Jerry or I or really any of our department heads could affect 180 baseball ops employees every day.
And you realize, we'll get to baseball, but you realize after he was a Buckeye and before 2011, you know what he did for 4 years? He was an attorney.
I did know that.
I'd like to know what the back of the baseball card from your attorney days looks like.
Really boring. it was a lot of paperwork, which is the reason I don't do it now. Like I can't think of I'm out here, it's sunny, this guy's playing catch over here, and I just think about the soul-sucking job of filling out paperwork all day in a suit. Compared to this, I made a good decision.
Yeah. All right, you want to talk baseball? Let's start with the number one guy on this team. The pivot for everything is Julio Rodriguez. For all the questions about the offense the last couple of years, I was pointing out earlier, when Julio hits, there's no problem with the offense. It all seems to work just fine. So where is he at between the relationship with Edgar, the relationship with his personal hitting coach? Where is Julio at in your eyes?
I think the first place I'd start is probably the best question to ask Julio himself. He knows himself better than anybody. From my perspective, I think he's in a great spot. I think it takes a while for guys to come in the league and figure out their own identity, what they're good at, what they're trying to accomplish, develop plans and routines that make sense for them, because what may work for me may not work for you, and what may work for one player that he views from across the clubhouse or across the dugout may not work for him. It may not work for his body. It may not work for his mind. And I think he continues to take steps forward and developing his own identity, both on the field in terms of what he can do in the batter's box, what he does defensively, and in the clubhouse, cultivating his own way of leading, his own way of galvanizing the group of players around him. Everybody knows he's the most talented guy on the field. There's no question about that. I think he has taken real steps forward second half of last year and this offseason and now into spring training in terms of how he's leading, how he's preparing himself to go max out his tools every day.
Do you have a sense how Edgar and Kevin Seitzer work with OV, his personal coach? How does that relationship function?
I think that relationship functions in that the most important thing we can all do is communicate. We can all communicate with what we're trying to work on, what Julio feels like the right thing to work on, is then make sure the message is consistent every day. Make it simple for the player. It's a very complicated game. coaching at its basic is making it as simple as you can for the person who's trying to execute it when the pitcher's throwing at 100 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm. Just a couple weeks here in the camp and 3 games in. Obviously, the infancy stages of all of this. But just big picture baseball-wise, as you look at this group of men that are all out here now and working and on the field, big picture, 30,000-foot level, what jumps out about this personnel group?
I think the depth of the pitching really stands out. Last year, obviously we had bullpen injuries that affected us. And I think coming into camp, it was one of our questions is this group of collective pitchers 1 through 13 as deep and good as it has been in previous years? Mm-hmm. And I think there were some hurdles to jump over as we got through the first half of last year between the injuries and some of the guys that just weren't able to take steps forward like we hoped. This year feels different. It feels more like 23 for us, more like 22 for us, just in terms of the depth of interesting arms, the guys who we really think can contribute. And then obviously, I don't want to bury the lead, the 5 guys at the front who start the game every day for 5 days straight. They're really good, really, really good, and the steps they have taken in their own personal growth are noticeable.
Who's on that list of guys that can contribute and maybe even especially in the rotation? Yeah. We were talking about it earlier. You guys have had an unbelievable run here with this group, and I don't want to jinx anything, and we're hoping that you guys found the secret to keeping pitchers healthy. If that's not the case, Who else could we see?
I don't suspect that's the case. I think we care a lot and we work really hard to do the right thing for the players all the time. I don't think we found the pixie dust that's going to allow us to keep pitchers healthy when the rest of the free world can't. We'll have adversity to overcome this year. Everybody does. Emerson Hancock was really good yesterday. We saw Logan Evans the other day, and it was like a typical Cactus League outing where it's 2 infield hits and then the ball bloops in, and it can get fast for him. I was super impressed with the way he handled that. He has really good stuff. We've seen Brandon Garcia in this camp already. You'll see him in a game here coming up. He's been really good.
He's been a reliever
Correct.
This year.
Yes.
If something were to go horribly wrong, could he be moved back to being a starter?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing that prevents us from doing that. We do think his quickest path to impact is out of the bullpen. And so I would frame him in sort of both buckets of guys who can impact us in different roles. We saw Casey Legamina and Shintaro Fujinami yesterday. Both those guys are really interesting. Fuji has unbelievable stuff, and I thought his ability to mix in his secondary stuff yesterday and throw it for strikes was a nice step forward. And then Casey's really unique. Obviously, we've had guys with that slot before, and I don't want to compare him to Sewald or Tyson Miller last year, but he does a lot of things that are similar, and just locking him in on what his plan A is and sort of aggressively attacking that every outing has been a focus for us, and I'm really excited about what he's doing right now.
16 years ago, first camp down here, spring training, Salk taught me a valuable lesson. The competition. I came in here just a total meathead when it came to baseball. Still largely am. But, competition isn't always a great thing. You kind of want a lot of your team settled. And if there's a spot here or a spot there, that can be healthy. Do I kind of hear you say that maybe the most competitive spot on this roster will be the back end of that bullpen? Not the leverage guys, but the bullpen in totality. Is there some legitimate competition there?
It always is in that spot. Obviously, we talked about injuries a minute ago, and just relievers by nature tend to be more volatile. I've been really impressed with what we've seen from Gabe Spire, who obviously had the unbelievable year in 23 when we acquired him. I think last year he struggled to figure out what was working for him and what wasn't. And you can see the work that he put in this offseason, and just the Gabe going forward looks really good right now. His body's in a great place. What's coming out of his hand is really strong. We had guys step up in the second half, guys like Trent Thornton, guys like Troy Taylor, that are really going to be interesting on this team. Colin Snyder is a guy who was awesome for us in the second half. We didn't anticipate and weren't really prepared for those guys in the first half of last year. We feel like with the addition of what those guys did in the second half, some of the names we just hit on, and then obviously Mooney, Santos, and hopefully a soon-to-be healthy Matt Brash, that's a really good bullpen.
I heard read a quote from Jerry the other day, and I want to make sure it's accurate. He's not always quoted perfectly, so I want to make sure I get this one right. I
am not going there.
I just want to make sure it's right. It's just accurate. He said something along the lines of the young guys will let them, if they show us something, we'll let them run with it.
Yep.
Can you elaborate on that? What does that mean to let some of the young guys run with it? Does that mean like straight out of spring? Does that mean in a few months? What does that mean?
don't think it means something different for every player. They tell you when they're ready. We can sit around all winter and say, well, maybe he'll be ready in April, or maybe it'll be June. Ultimately, they tell you, and spring training is a little harder to figure out sometimes just because nothing that happens on the field here is that predictive of anything. Once you get into the regular season, the players tell you. Julio told us in 22, I'm absolutely ready to go. I'm ready to go from a talent perspective. I'm ready to go from a skills perspective. And I'm ready to go from a maturity perspective. I just don't think it's super productive to put limits on young players, particularly the ultra-talented ones. They'll push people out of the way when they're ready.
How do you make that decision in stacking this rotation? You mentioned they're the foundation of this whole deal anyway, right? Dan comes in and Logan, where is he at? Luis, where is he? Is it a given that Luis is going to be starter day one, or will they kind of tell you and the guys tell you that over the next month?
I think that's a decision that's a sort of a collective organizational decision, but I do think it's ultimately the manager and the pitching coaches who should make that call. However, whatever order we start in will probably not be the order that we're in by the end of April. Things will happen. Somebody will get skipped. We'll move somebody around. We'll have a rain out. Obviously, it's a huge honor the way in which we start to take the ball on opening day. The Mariners have had an unbelievable run of just like dudes with a capital D take the ball on opening day. However, Dan and the pitching coaches decide to work that out, we're in a good spot because we have 5 guys who could legitimately take the ball on opening day for most teams.
How do you feel about your offseason?
I feel fine about the offseason. I want to answer this in the right way. We, in general, when you go to an offseason, you spend all of October vetting what are the possibilities with other teams. And then free agency starts in early November, and you vet all those possibilities. We tried very hard to make transactions that maybe were more impactful than what we ultimately ended up doing. What we did not want to do is make transactions for transaction's sake. Doing things to make me emotionally feel like we accomplished something that actually made us worse is not a good decision in the long run. There's all sorts of biases and moral hazards that you can attach with the jobs that people in my role do. And what I can't get caught up in is doing something that makes me feel good in a moment. Hey, let's shake up the snow globe. Let's do a bunch of things that ultimately make the roster worse, make the floor lower without making the ceiling higher. So we would have liked to have accomplished more to add more to the team. I don't think that there's an end date on doing that right now.
How did you go through the thought process of pitching, balancing the two sides of your team, pitching and hitting? The team was obviously last year heavily imbalanced towards the pitching side. Yeah. What would you need to get back to be willing to give up some of the strength to help some of the weakness?
It's wins in, wins out. Like there's obviously if you're on the extreme end, if you're all one way and not all the other way, it can be hard more emotionally than it can actually be like from the spreadsheet perspective. And I'm not immune to that. We feel like we have probably a more balanced team than we're given credit for in some way. But ultimately, the results on the field will speak to whether that's right or wrong. I said it, I think, 2 weeks ago when I was in visiting with you guys and Bump and Stacy. We played terrible offense for 4 months as a team, just bad. Like, there's no sugarcoating it. There's no way of getting around it. We were frustrated. We just did not consistently play good offense. We didn't do the big things, and we didn't do the little things. For the last 2 months of the season, we played pretty good offense, and it's not a 34-game Dan and Edgar sample. It's like, for really from the All-Star break on, post Vic playing every day and post acquiring Randy, along with JT, we played really good offense. We did the little things well, and we did the big things well. We took our walks, and we hit homers. We also moved runners and stole bases. We were really well-rounded. We need to do that for 6 months. We believe in this roster. It's partially why we were less transactional, because we felt like just doing things to shake it up when we felt like we do have a good roster that underachieved for large segments of the season last year offensively was not smart. We were banking somewhat on the players that we have being better than they were over the 6 month season. But we need to go show it. There's no other way of getting around it. We cannot play offense. I want to say on like July 1st, we were 28th in the league in runs scored. We cannot play offense like that.
Mm-hmm. Is you vetted and planned for the market conditions there in October and into November? Anything jump out with what the market actually did over the months that followed?
Not really. I wouldn't say we were surprised, and I don't mean that to come off in an arrogant way at all. Mm-hmm. Like every year, somebody gets a little more than you're expecting. Somebody's a little harder to acquire via trade than you're expecting. But in aggregate, like, we viewed the infield market as kind of a tough market this offseason, but we knew that was an area we had to address. We viewed the pitching market as likely a very expensive venture in free agency and a tough to acquire venture in trade. We had a lot of conversations this offseason, and ultimately we just never got to a point where anyone in our room was convicted or had momentum that it was going to make us better to trade off of our current Major League roster for pieces we just didn't feel like were of equal value to our team.
What about the veteran leadership presence? We've talked over the years about the difference that Carlos Santana made, that Justin Turner made. Both of those guys ended up elsewhere this offseason. How do you feel the clubhouse is in terms of that veteran presence?
Feel really good about the clubhouse as a whole. Obviously, that's, a part of Donovan Solano's skill set. He's been on good teams for a long time. After we agreed to terms with him, Perry Hill, unprompted, picked up the phone and called me and just said the best. He is the best. He and Polo, fit really well together. Bone compared the two of them and said, these guys are at the top of my scale for veteran leaders who always are in the right place, who always do the right thing. Obviously, we have some of our own guys coming back that we feel good about. I think Cal and Logan Gilbert taking steps forward in their own careers. Young leaders like Bryce Miller, guys around the diamond. Dylan Moore has been a leader in our clubhouse. I do think Victor Robles is sort of an underrated leader and really galvanized the group. The energy that he brought every day last year was big for us. So I don't think it's ever really one person, but there's no question that guys like Carlos and JT brought a ton to us in that area, just in the value of having been through it and done almost everything you can do in baseball.
Justin, what do you think is the biggest misperception for those of us that are not in the room, those of us that are not in the day-to-day, those of us that don't handle all the responsibilities that come with management and administration of all the people and personnel? What do you think is the biggest misperception for those of us outside to the business of baseball on the inside?
Wow, that's a great question. I've never gotten asked that question before, so I'm just going to talk for a minute and try and sort through what I think that is.
That's what we do every day.
Misperception. I think it's how much goes into any one player. Like the number of people in a baseball ops group that affect the decisions from the time that player is drafted or signed all the way to the time that he gets in the big leagues to the improvement they make. There's so many people, and we're sort of an average-sized baseball ops group, 180 people in the org, and all of them have a real impact on what goes on with the Mariners on the major league field. And I don't think people realize how many people are invested night to night in that outcome, even if they're not in Seattle that day, if they're in Little Rock working with the Double-A team, or they're in Everett, or they're a scout who's on the East Coast or in Japan or Korea. Like, all of those people have such a huge role in what we do every day, and no one ever hears about them.
You mentioned the analytical side of things. I imagine that's still a major part of the way you acquire and choose who to acquire and who to draft, et cetera. What role is it going to be playing in terms of major league strategy on the field? Because what we saw last year and a lot of what we've heard seems like it runs pretty contrary to a lot of the analytical revolution over the last 20, 30 years. Is the team still invested in analytics as a major part of their strategy?
I don't think there's going to be any change from the way we've sort of handled strategy from a data perspective over the years. I would sort of disagree with the premise that things change down the stretch. There's no data science or analytical measure that doesn't think that stealing bases at a high rate of success is the right thing to do. If we talk about bunting, tell me what the score is, tell me where we're playing, tell me who's batting, tell me who's pitching, tell me what inning it is. Then I'll tell you whether it's a good idea or not. I thought we executed at a really high level from a data strategy perspective over the last 6 weeks of the season, if you sort of want to draw an arbitrary line to pre-Dan and post-Dan, and I would expect us to continue to execute at a high level.
So Dan is not going to play this like 1980s or 90s baseball?
I don't think so, no. We ran pretty, I wouldn't say hardline platoons, but we platoon players over the last 35, 40 games of the season, just like we had before. We pinch hit, if anything, a little more than we had before. We were more aggressive on the bases, but in some ways I think our talent dictated, with Victor and Randy, us being more aggressive on the bases than we had. different players have different skill sets, but I don't anticipate us like turning back the clock and doing anything differently. I think the whole staff is sort of wired to approach things from an evidence-based way.
Where will we, and we, the collective Mariner fans and all of us that follow this every single day and love it, where will we feel maybe the most difference between Dan and Edgar? And we got to see it in a snippet, right, for the final 35, 40 games. Yep. Where do you think we'll feel it the most this spring and heading into this 25 season?
I don't know if you will. I got to be honest. I mean, inevitably when you talk about someone new who's here, you're sort of making a statement about someone who isn't here anymore. Scott believed in, moving runners and hitting with runners in scoring position. Scott believed in the center of the field. I do think the messaging will be different. I think Edgar's gift is in the message, his ability to make it simple for hitters, to talk about big ideas, but distill them into ways that really connect and resonate with players because he's presenting them in a way that's simple and not complicated. I think that strikes the perfect balance for what we're trying to do. Is we're trying to take all this data and info and these big ideas, and we're going to put them in the funnel and have an awesome messenger at the bottom of the funnel to tell the player, this is what I'm hoping you can accomplish. This is what I believe you can do. And I think Edgar's gift as a hitting coach is just that. He connects with players. He can make the complicated simple. I think that's a big reason why Kevin Seitzer connected with all of us in the interview process, because he and Edgar are kind of cut from the same cloth. Like, they all believe in, hitting the ball hard in the air to the alleys. Edgar's way of messaging it may be different than what we've had in the past, and I hope it resonates better than it has in the past.
Last thing, give us one guy, one name that we haven't talked about here in the last 25 minutes.
Is pick to click?
Yeah, no, just if somebody comes out to the ballpark here to spring training, if they make their way down from Seattle, give me one name that they should absolutely make sure they watch for a few minutes.
I'm going to cheat here.
Okay.
You got to go to the backfields and see Jurangelo St. pitch if he's throwing on the backfields. I walked down there the other day. I actually missed the first inning of our first Cactus League game because I wanted to go see it. It is so damn cool to go watch him do it. So the way it was set up for the live VP, and obviously we can't control game conditions, but the way it was set up for the live VP, he's going to pitch to two batters right-handed, then one batter left-handed, and then two batters right-handed, and then one batter left-handed. And obviously we set it up so he's only facing lefties left-handed because he would never do it the other way in a game in all likelihood. So Ty Pete stepped in there. Ty Pete was the third batter of the game. Ty Pete is left-handed, for those who don't know, and he pitched to Ty Pete left-handed. He has that at-bat. He pitches to the next hitter right-handed, and then Ty Pete is the next hitter again because it's just a live VP. So Ty Pete steps back in, again, one batter after he just pitched to him left-handed, and Jurangelo flips the glove around and pitches to him right-handed. It was so awesome. It was so cool.
What did Pete say afterwards?
He's like, that was crazy. And also, Jurangelo's throwing 98 right-handed and 93 left-handed, and it's just, who can do that? That is I know Logan Gilbert really wants to try it, and that's where I draw a hard line on experimentation if Logan wants to throw left-handed. But it was so cool. And I think that's the best part for us of spring training is seeing the young kids, seeing them for the first time and getting to know them a little bit, and watching Jurangelo and Ryan Sloan, our second-round pick last year, just throw rockets. Obviously, Jurangelo with both hands, Ryan with his right hand, was really cool. And if you're a fan and you come down here, you get a chance to walk to the backfields and see those guys on a day when they're pitching, I would definitely encourage it because in Jurangelo's case, there's literally no one like him.
That's awesome.
Cool. Justin Hollander, Executive Vice President and General Manager, and now we know exactly what that means. So thanks for sitting down with us. Hopefully we'll do it again.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for watching us at Spring Training. If you want more of this kind of content, it's pretty easy. Just subscribe.
Yep, and you can always download the app. I think he tells you that every once in a while. You can download the Seattle Sports app as well.